is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Kirk, Otis, president of Keiretsu Forum, North Texas. Keiretsu Forum is a global investment community of accredited private equity angel investors, venture capitalists, and corporate institutional investors. Keiretsu Forum is a worldwide network of capital, resources, and deal flow with 53 chapters on 4 continents. Keiretsu Forum members invest in high-quality, diverse investment opportunities. Kirk, thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Could you share a little bit about your journey and some of your key experiences that have shaped your career?
Yeah, sure. First, I grew up in Ohio and started at Price Waterhouse. And I got there and on the very beginning, I was 21 years old. Price Waterhouse had just started a new group called Management Advisory Services, which combined their regular audit service with tax and a consulting practice. And so I jumped in. And so from the very beginning, I was helping entrepreneurs with their finances, with their strategies, board materials, you name it. And that was right from the beginning of my career.
So what motivated you to pivot your career towards supporting early stage ventures?
Well, like I said, it probably wasn't a pivot. I started there, but from Price Waterhouse, I ended up going and getting my master's degree at SMU here in Dallas. And during that phase, I was working for a large conglomerate downtown. And as soon as I finished up my MBA, I was asked to take over the head finance role at a joint venture they had created in Cleveland, Ohio. So my first management role, I was effectively the CFO of the company, was of a company that had fewer than 100 employees and just a handful of customers. Now, it was part of a large conglomerate, so it had systems, but in terms of having a different culture in management style and, all the things that you kind of see in an entrepreneurial company existed in this joint venture.
Well, as someone who has navigated both startups and large corporations, what insights can you offer about the differences in approaching transactions and investments in those different environments?
Well, that's very interesting. In a larger corporation, there's ongoing revenue. There's cash flow that can meet the obligation. It tends to be more debt oriented rather than equity raises. There's large asset base, and in the company itself is got all the functional areas covered and, in its various silos. And you end up spending a lot of time with subject matter experts, but they're not necessarily communicating or on the same page. So a lot of your time ends up being spent trying to get people coordinated, thinking about things appropriately, worried about what the big issues are and not some sort of detail that doesn't matter. In a venture, in an entrepreneurial led company, you don't have a lot of those elements. You kind of lack a lot of the expertise and experience that you might have in a large company, but you've got people that are much more coordinated. They tend to be much more on the same page and decisions occur a lot faster. But you also, from a financial perspective, you don't have large amounts of cash flow necessarily because a lot of the companies are just trying to get their first revenue. And, the fundings tend to be more equity based and things don't have a debt service component to it.
Well, as president of Keiretsu Forum, North Texas, how do you approach supporting a wide range of entrepreneurs and ventures?
Well, fortunately, with the large investor base at Keiretsu, there's a subject matter expert in just about any topic or domain you can imagine. And so you're able to reach out and call on people that really want to help, that actually can help. And, the domains might be things like finance, intellectual property, but, there's also the actual technical aspect of it. So it might be a particular medical technology or a cancer therapy or something like that. And, you just try to get the right people on a team to look at the opportunities ultimately.
Well, Keiretsu Forum is known for its rigorous company vetting process for investments. Can you explain this process and how it benefits both investors and entrepreneurs?
Sure. It is multiple layers. Kind of the entry point is a web-based application, a number of questions that talk about the business model and its strategy. Frankly, when I tell people to submit, I suggest that they keep a copy of their answers and kind of polish them because they're the kind of material that end up in, say, like a one pager for a company. And so it's quite useful to think about it that way. And it's an opportunity for a company to make sure that it's articulating its strategy and what its value proposition is very clearly. That's where it starts. There's a couple of people that look at those inbound opportunities and they select 10 of those firms that they think are probably the best suited for Keiretsu. And then we have a screening committee that meets once a month to rank list those 10. We put them in three buckets. One is, this isn't appropriate for Keiretsu for any number of reasons. It might be the business model, it might be the stage of the company, or it might be, our belief of how mature the company is. And then there's a bucket of companies that we think is interesting, but they're just not ready to present. And so we'll circle back and let them know what things they need to be working on and then ask them to resubmit once they're ready. And then there's the other category says, essentially, yes, we want to get them in the broader investment community with our members. And so then the next layer is with the members of Keiretsu that have the opportunity to look at them, and they get to decide whether it's interesting enough that they might invest and would like to participate in diligence or if they'd be willing to participate in diligence. And then from that, we form a diligence team and spend, a considerable amount of time putting together a diligence report, which, as you know, Hall, is one of the elements that differentiates Keiretsu as well, is the depth of his diligence. And I tell prospective investors all the time, as you go and you talk in the community about Keiretsu, you're likely to hear people say something about the diligence process and the robustness of the diligence process, which is quite extensive.
So you've raised significant venture capital for startups in the past. What are some essential factors that investors look for when they're considering funding opportunities? And how can entrepreneurs best position themselves to attract investment?
Well, number one is, the quality of the team. You hear that team is important in a lot of businesses. And I don't think I don't think there's any segment in our economy where it's more important in the earlier stages of a company. You need to have the people with experience, breadth of experience. And, you can really see that companies that don't have that experience struggle in some regards. They also can make up for it in energy, and they can certainly make up for it if they bring in board members or board advisors to augment a team that might be less mature or have less experience in a particular domain. So it's not that you have to have tons of experience. It's just that makes for a better team. And if you don't have tons of experience, then you need to surround yourself with people in a broader context that do have that experience.
Well, given your involvement in international transactions, could you share a memorable experience or lesson learned from navigating the complexities of cross-border deals?
I don't know if it's broadcast in the international community so much about the interest of Americans to work quickly in transactions. We tend to have a very legalistic view and want to move through a transaction very quickly, come to agreement and finish it off. And I'd say that the Europeans, and I've done transactions in Ireland and the UK, France, and Italy, and Denmark. And they tend to be very slow and methodical, but their agreements are a lot of times much thinner and lighter and, speak in more business terms as opposed to legal terms. So the documentation process is lighter, but the negotiation time frame seems to be longer. And if you go to Asia, they use American style like agreements. So they'll have a much heavier documentation process, but more so than the Europeans, I would even say. They try to use time to their advantage and things just move incredibly slowly. And, I don't know, I would love to kind of get a perspective on, say, an Asian company doing business with another Asian country and whether they use time as a leverage point or if it's just something they use against Americans. But that to me would be the primary thing I'd bring to the table here.
Oh, that's great. Well, Kirk, could you describe the typical profile of early stage company investors in Keiretsu Forum, particularly those in North Texas?
Well, we have access to a number of people from number of backgrounds and domains. There's medical, legal, a lot of technology folks. There's domains that we haven't attracted that much background of, which we could certainly use, for example, in the medical field. And I would say that most of them come from an entrepreneurial background as opposed to a large company perspective. Naturally, a lot of entrepreneurs came out of large companies, but I'd say most of them have had some measure of success as an entrepreneur, which makes them particularly interested in helping others.
Well, your experience, what motivates these investors to get involved in early stage investments, and what are they looking for in potential ventures?
Well, I think it's a large part their desire to get engaged, to help out entrepreneurs with their passion.
Great. Well, based on your experience, what emerging trends do you see in the early stage investment landscape, especially in North Texas?
From my perspective, I think the opportunity is to fill a funding gap. I think the door is wide open in terms of domains, but there's a number of angel networks that are in the, seed capital, earlier stage, call it $100,000 to $500,000 raise maybe. But beyond that, there's a considerable gap between that and the venture community. We've kind of suffered over the last 10 years and seen a number of the venture firms close up shop. And so it's created this gap in the capital structure of funding stage of various companies. And so to me, that's the opportunity is to fill that gap from a finance perspective.
Lastly, Kurt, what last thoughts or advice would you like to share with our private equity investors and early stage entrepreneurs listening today?
Well, I think you'll find Keiretsu to be a little bit differently positioned than other angel networks. So if you have some angel experience or have some personal experience investing, I think that you'll find our deal flow to be more mature, further along than what you would typically see. Solid opportunities. So that's one thing. And before you decide whether it's for you or not, what you really should do is come and join us for a session or two so you understand the process and see the quality of the companies and see the kinds of people that you would be potentially working with to fund companies and get them the capital they need to pursue their dream, really.
Well, so what advice would you give listeners interested in learning more about Keiretsu Forum or attending a meeting? How can they get involved?
Sure. Well, they can send me an email at Otis@keiretsuforum.net or give me a call or reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Kirk Otis. And the phone number is 972-768-8568.
We'll include your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope you have you back for a follow-up soon.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate it, Hall. All right. Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.